Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu's legal calendar's finally caught up with him, and he's eyeing the military calendar like a man checking the weather report before deciding whether or not to leave the house. After years of postponements, adjournments, and miraculous bouts of illness whenever the witness box beckoned over his corruption trial, the Jerusalem District Court has ordered the Prime Minister to haul himself in 3 times a week from November. Yet just as the gavel comes down, Netanyahu's sabre starts to rattle again. You just can't believe the coincidence, can you? Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and inevitably Iran, as if the surest defence against corruption charges is still a good offence. In Israel's political playbook, no one has blended court avoidance and wartime bravado quite like Benjamin Netanyahu has done. And the coming months, November especially, look very attractive to opening up yet another war front with somebody. Surely nobody still believes it's all coincidence, do they? Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu has been on trial for corruption for nearly half a decade now, yet he has never been closer to being compelled to face sustained forensic cross-examination in court. Just this week, judges in the Jerusalem District Court issued a ruling that broke with years of slow-moving precedent, ordering that beginning in November, he must testify 3 times a week as part of an intensified 4-day weekly hearing schedule. But as the court set this accelerated timetable, Netanyahu is also signalling a readiness to escalate multiple conflicts, including the possibility of fresh strikes on Iran, creating a collision between the legal calendar and the war calendar that could determine whether his trial ever reaches a verdict. The symbolism of this shift is as important as the practical implications are. For years, Netanyahu has controlled the pace of these proceedings, using a combination of legal manoeuvres, appeals on procedural grounds, health-related absences, and perhaps most consequentially, national crises to keep himself from being pinned down in the witness box. The order to appear 3 times a week in November threatens to shatter that pattern. Yet Netanyahu hasn't dodged the courtroom for as long as he has by accident. He understands that the calendar of war can be just as malleable as the question of justice. The question hanging over Israel now is whether he intends to set one against the other, as if he hadn't already been accused of doing so before now. The charges he faces, bribery, fraud and breach of trust in 3 separate cases known as 1000, 2000 and 4000, go to the heart of political integrity in Israel. Case 4000, the most serious, alleges that Netanyahu granted regulatory favours worth hundreds of millions of shekels to Shaul Elovitch, the controlling shareholder of Bezek Telecom, in exchange for positive coverage of Elovitch's Walla news site. Case 1000 involves allegations of accepting lavish gifts, including cigars and champagne, from wealthy businessmen in return for favours. Case 2000 concerns an alleged deal with Arnon Moses, publisher of Yedioth Aharonoth, to limit the circulation of rival daily Israel Hayom in exchange for favourable coverage. Each case carries the potential for a criminal conviction and prison time. When Netanyahu took the stand for the first time in December of last year, Wall Street Journal reporters described a tense, defensive performance that hinted at how damaging sustained cross-examination could be. The slow pace of the trial up to now has been no accident either. Early on, Netanyahu's legal team challenged the admissibility of key pieces of evidence, including recordings and witness statements, and argued over the order in which witnesses could be called. Each motion consumed weeks of court time. The judges agreed to hold hearings only twice a week, a schedule already light by international standards, and frequently allowed sessions to be cancelled for reasons ranging from the Prime Minister's foreign travel to illness. As AP News has documented, some postponements were granted with less than 24 hours' notice, such as when Netanyahu claimed food poisoning. In other instances, ongoing conflicts or national security emergencies were cited as reasons he could not be in court. Judges appeared reluctant to challenge these claims, wary of being seen as compromising Israel's readiness in a crisis. This dynamic, legal proceedings yielding to wartime imperatives, has recurred often enough to form a clear pattern. In May 2021, during Operation Guardian of the Walls in Gaza, the trial schedule collapsed with hearings suspended for weeks. In October 2023, as the war with Hamas escalated into the genocide in Gaza, courtroom activity again halted. In June of this year, Operation Rising Lion saw Israeli jets striking deep inside Iran, hitting nuclear facilities at Natanz, Fordo and Isfahan. During that period, hearings were cancelled or shortened, with Netanyahu's security obligations cited as the reason. The effect was always the same. The legal clock stopped ticking. This record is why the November 2025 schedule matters so much now. It represents the first serious attempt by the judiciary to end Netanyahu's cycle of avoidance. But it also sets up a confrontation between the court's timetable and the Prime Minister's ability to create or exploit national emergencies. History suggests that when Netanyahu is cornered, war is rarely far behind. The most obvious front for such a diversion is Iran. Netanyahu's warning about Iran's nuclear program dates back more than 3 decades, of course, and in June, Foreign Policy, as one outlet in particular, published a profile describing his obsession with Tehran's atomic ambitions as a defining feature of his political career. And of course, that same month, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, striking multiple nuclear sites. As Foreign Policy also reported in a separate analysis, the timing was driven by a fleeting intelligence window, apparently, a unique alignment of operational readiness and intelligence on Iranian vulnerabilities. Yet the rhetoric following the strike suggested a mission far broader than the traditional goal of just delaying uranium enrichment. The 13th of June Foreign Policy piece argued that Operation Rising Lion was actually intended not just to slow Iran's nuclear program, but to deliver a death blow to the Islamic Republic's regional influence, targeting the entire axis of resistance. So this shift from a finite, measurable military objective that was being reported in many other outlets, and certainly on the TV news, to actually being an open-ended campaign potentially of regime destabilization, has significant implications for Netanyahu's trial. The former could be achieved or fail within months. The latter can be extended indefinitely, absorbing any number of skirmishes and proxy confrontations into its scope while it's at it. It is, in political terms, the perfect umbrella under which to wage perpetual war and to delay personal legal reckoning. And of course, there's a bit of talk going on right now, a little bit of rumours going on right now, that Netanyahu could well go back into Iran at any time from the end of this month to the end of the year. And, well, November's looking pretty good for him right now, isn't it? The risk of renewed escalation with Iran in the coming months is not hypothetical. As Al Jazeera have reported, the UK, France and Germany have set a late August deadline, another coincidence, to trigger the snapback of UN sanctions on Iran, a move that would almost certainly inflame tensions there. And should that happen, Netanyahu would have both the diplomatic pretext and arguably the strategic incentive to act again at that point. Any Israeli strike on Iranian assets, whether overt or covert, would certainly prompt retaliation. The result could be a multi-front emergency in precisely that September-November window when the court intends to accelerate Netanyahu's testimony. Beyond Iran, Netanyahu has been signalling ideological ambitions that could justify conflict on other fronts as well. Back on the 12th of August, as reported by the Times of Israel, he described himself as being on a historic and spiritual mission and said he was very much connected to the vision of Greater Israel. US non-profit outlet Truthout explained that this extremist concept includes territory far beyond Israel's current borders. Certainly I've spoken about it in a number of my videos as well, as this image illustrates perfectly, potentially incorporating parts of Jordan and Egypt, the whole of Lebanon, the bit of Syria they are currently fighting over, just another coincidence of course, and beyond. The Arab League, Egypt, Jordan, they've condemned the remarks, accusing Netanyahu of expansionism. The New Arab detailed Egyptian outrage, warning of the strain on the Camp David peace treaty. Well, perhaps Sisi should stop aiding and abetting Israel in their starvation of Gaza, therefore. He's been ignoring the violations of the Camp David peace treaty by the simple fact Israel controls the Rafah crossing for well over 12 months now. You can't just call it out now and act affronted. But such rhetoric is not only a rallying cry for his domestic base, it also frames conflict with neighbours as a fulfilment of historical destiny now, making escalation yet more palatable to his supporters. At the same time, Netanyahu's government is advancing policies that could inflame other theatres. On the 9th of August, it was reported that the cabinet has approved the plan to take over Gaza City, an operation that would entail intense urban combat and significant casualties. In the West Bank, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has authorised new settlement expansion, telling Reuters this was intended to bury the idea of a Palestinian state. Each of these moves risks triggering violence that could be used to justify further delays to Netanyahu's court appearances. The confluence of these factors creates what might be called a collision course, therefore. On one side is the judiciary, seeking to enforce the principle that no one is above the law by compelling the Prime Minister to appear regularly in court. On the other side is a political leader with both the motive and the means to create circumstances that make such appearances impossible. The trial calendar and the war calendar are on a path to intersect come November, and the outcome will test not only Netanyahu's personal fate, but the resilience of Israel's democratic institutions. If Netanyahu once again manages to use war to avoid trial, The precedent will be devastating. It will confirm that the head of government can in effect veto judicial proceedings by manufacturing or prolonging national emergencies. This would completely erode the rule of law in Israel, embolden future leaders to follow suit, and distort Israel's foreign policy by aligning military action with personal legal needs. For the judiciary, it would be a blow to their credibility completely. For the public, it would be a signal that accountability is all negotiable when power is at stake. The implications are not, of course, confined to Israel. As analyses of the Iran conflict have shown, military decisions made in Israel often draw in the United States and European allies. Supporting Israel in wartime is a long-standing policy for many of these governments. They do it unquestioningly, time after time. But doing so when the timing appears linked to a leader's legal troubles risks complicity in undermining democratic norms in those states too. If foreign troops, ships or aircraft are deployed in support of Israeli operations that serve primarily to delay a corruption trial, the damage to the credibility of those governments will be severe. And we need to be mindful and keep this at the forefront of our minds over the next few months. The months ahead will therefore be a test of multiple actors, won't they? The Israeli judiciary must decide whether it will hold firm to its November schedule, even in the face of military escalation. It should, which given the track record seems painfully likely though. The opposition must decide whether it will challenge the conflation of national security with personal legal survival. The media must decide whether it will connect the dots between the trial calendar and the war calendar, or whether it will allow battlefield footage to eclipse courtroom scrutiny, because frankly it does just sell better, doesn't it? And Israel's allies must decide whether they will enable or resist a strategy that puts perpetual conflict at the service of political immunity. In the end, this is not simply about one man's trial. It's about whether Israel can maintain a separation between the imperatives of justice and the temptations of wartime politics. Netanyahu has shown that he is willing to collapse that distinction when it serves him. The stakes in November could not therefore be higher. If he turns to fresh conflict, whether in Gaza or Lebanon or with Iran or whoever, frankly, to escape testifying 3 times a week, the damage will not be confined to the outcome of his corruption case. It will set a precedent that war can be weaponized against the rule of law itself, leaving the country and the region and its allies to live with the consequences long after the verdict that never ends up coming. Of course, war is not the only way Israel can end up getting a beasting, however. Iran certainly gave them that in June, but Norway are too, actually, and we don't need to wait until November for that, as they might be on the verge of dumping all $2 billion in Israeli investments held by their oil fund, and not before time, with a ruling due on that just next week. Get all the details of that story and the assets Norway have just dumped already in this video recommendation. Here is your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.